talking to myself because the audio wasn't working. But that's okay. I got your attention. Thank you if you dropped me a comment and I didn't see it. I know people were commenting earlier that I should be reading the comment. I haven't. Oh, there you are, Catherine. There we are. So Catherine says no sound. Is it just me? Is it still no sound? I think it should have sound. Let's switch over to our iPad. We'll take a look together. Let's see here. Where do I want to go? Let's see. Let's go to YouTube. Hey, look. I'm live. Is it going to be sound? Oh, it's connected to AirPlay, so it's not going to show me. Okay, well. Okay. Okay. Let's check on the phone. Going live soon. Let's check on the phone. Awesome. We're live. All right, everybody, we are live. Welcome. My name is Tucker Johnson, and I am the co-author, one of the authors of The General Theory of the Translation Company, and together with my founder, Renato Beninato. This is a book that we wrote about 3 years ago, and right before we started a company called Nimdzi Insight, and that's the channels that we're broadcasting through right now. And because we started this company about 3 years ago, and we wrote this book about 3 years ago, I thought it was time to go back and read our book and see what's changed and what's stayed the same. And I'm doing it live in this series for all of you to join me. And so if you'd like to join, then please subscribe to whatever channel you're watching this on so that you can be notified. I'm not going live at any particular schedule at this point. My life is not that organized yet. I'm working on that. But if there's a good response to this, or if people are interested, we may schedule some regular time so that people can join together. Alrighty. Let's dive right in here. Last time we went through the introduction and talked about what is the General Theory of the Translation Company. If you'd like, you can go back and catch up. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. I suggest that you go back and just get an intro of what is the General Theory of the Translation Company, because it's going to be important as we go throughout this. And here we're going to get into a high-level look of the industry, starting with this section, which is aptly titled A High-Level Look. So let's dive right in, shall we? A high-level look. Now, let me turn off my notifications first. Nika, why are you disrupting my stream? A high-level look, defining the language services industry. So what exactly are we talking about when we discuss the language services industry? We need to take a moment to explain, because perhaps some of our readers are industry outsiders, or maybe just getting into the industry. Even if you are an industry veteran, it's important for us to frame the discussion before getting much further, just to make sure we are all on the same page. To define the industry, let's first define the services included in this broad category. Technically, language services can include anything that has to deal with, well, language. We like to not overcomplicate things here. We realize this is a broad definition, so for the purposes of this book, we are going to refine this definition some more. The language services industry includes any and all businesses related to helping language services buyers, LSBs, to adapt or create content, products, or services in order to better compete in the global marketplace. This includes translation, internationalization, localization, interpreting, both in person and over the phone, and VRI, global market research, multimedia adaptation such as voiceover, dubbing and subtitling, marketing and branding localization, international consulting, software localization, and related services, testing, and the list could go on and on. To fully understand the different services and companies that provide them, we will break out this section into a short discussion of each of the major cases of service providers in the industry. These descriptions and illustrations are meant to be general only and may not accurately reflect your current position or offerings. Keep in mind that the localization services industry is incredibly complex and dynamic. It would take 1,000 pages to even list a fraction of the different possible iterations of LSPs, and nobody wants to write or read 1,000 pages of that. So, what are the different types of providers we find in the industry? And we list them here. We've got a nice little bulleted list if you're following along at home. Massive multiple language service providers, MMLSPs. 2. Multiple language service providers, MLSPs. 3. Regional multiple language service providers, RMLSPs. 4. Single language service providers, SLSP. Then we have freelancers or contracted language professionals, CLP, and language technology providers, LTP. Now, before we get into the next part on the structure of the industry, I want to talk a little bit about these terms. Well, let's go back over here so that we can see them together. Perhaps let's go to figure 3 because it's prettier than the bulleted list and it lists the same things. A lot of these acronyms that we're using in this book are generally accepted terms in the industry, and they always have been. Some of the acronyms that we're using in this book are new. They were created for this book. And of those, some of them have caught on and some of them have not. So, for example, we talk about LTPs. An LTP is a term that I hear used nowadays in this industry, and it wasn't 3 years ago, and we made it up for this book. And so that's kind of cool that the industry has adopted our term. However, some of the terms have not been adopted. For example, MMLSP, Massive Multiple Language Service Provider, MMLSP. This is a term that nobody uses. Let's be honest, nobody in the industry is using this term. And that's okay, because it's a ridiculous term. It's too many letters. It's too much to remember. However, I stand by this term. And here's why. Because I think there is a huge need for this term in the industry. Let's look at this. See this? This is, you can't see this. All right. This is the NIMSY 100. And the NIMSY 100 lists the largest, I should say, LSPs in the industry every year. Surely, if you're familiar with NIMSY, you're familiar with the NIMSY 100. So these top players at the top here, if you can see that, keep getting bigger. And that's not to say that the industry is becoming more and more centralized, because it still is a very niche industry. So the bigger players are getting bigger. They're gobbling up more pie, but the whole pie itself, the industry as itself, as a whole, is getting bigger. So it's not to say that it's getting less or more centralized. It's just to say that the biggest players are getting bigger. And I believe that there is a need. There's for a distinction between those really big LSPs, those really big language service providers, and let's say the medium-sized guys. So pretty much, anybody here on this, in the top 10 here, we've got TransPerfect, we've got Lionbridge, we've got Language Line, SDL, RWS, Appen, Keyword Studios, Relocalize, SDI Media. It goes on. The list is out of date now. There's been some major acquisitions, both finalized and announced in this year. So stay tuned for 2021 version of the NIMSY 100. But I stand by this term, used, MMLSP, because I think that there's a need for it in the industry. So let's work together to bring that term. Hashtag MMLSP. Tweet it, live it, learn it. Moving on. We need to clarify one thing up front. LSPs do not provide translation. They provide vendor management, project management, and sales. Remember, those are the three core functions. This may come as a shock to you. You may then ask why one would hire a language services company to provide translations. Oh, I skipped a whole section here on structure of the industry. Sorry, because we skipped ahead. Structure of the industry. There are as many different types of services in the language services industry as there are words in a dictionary. And there are as many different types of service providers as there are key players and other key players as there are sentences written from those words. In this section, we discuss the various types of key players in the industry, starting with a look at the language services value chain, language services buyers, LSBs, and moving on to the language services providers, including multiple language services providers, both MMLSPs and MLSPs, regional multiple language service providers, single language service providers, freelancers, contracted language professionals, and everybody, the whole language services value chain. Side note, the freelancers and contracted language professionals certainly make up the vast majority of people in this industry, and that's no surprises there, but let's not forget about them. And I want to call that out now. Why? Because I don't talk about them much in this book. I don't talk about translators. And that's not out of any disrespect for translators. Translators are the lifeblood of the industry. It's simply because this book isn't for translators. It's for businesses. It's for translators who want to start a translation company and need to understand how to do that. So yeah, if you're looking for tips on how to be a better translator, there's some excellent books out there. I have a copy of Yost's book here somewhere. There's so many good resources for translators out there. This isn't one of them. Because in the next section, we're going to talk about structure of the industry. So structure of the industry. There are so many different types of services in the language services industry as there are words in a dictionary. Oh, maybe I did read this. Now we're doing it again. There are as many different types of services in the language services industry as there are words in a dictionary. And there are as many different types of service providers and other key players as there are sentences written from those words. In this section, we discuss the various types of key players in the industry, starting with a look at the language services value chain. Each of these key players interact with each other in the language services value chain, which we will discuss further in a later chapter, but deserves a brief introduction here. So we're going to talk about the language services value chain more, let's just say, but we're going to introduce it here. The language services industry is multi-layered, as can be seen from Figure 3, which we just looked at. Each layer represents another intermediary services provider, as we will discuss in greater detail later in this chapter. At first glance, it seems to be just an unnecessarily long chain of middlemen and outsourcing. One may ask, if a buyer needs translations, why wouldn't they just cut out the middlemen and hire translators, or engage with freelance translators directly? By doing this, they could cut out the middleman and reduce costs, but this would be a mistake. There is a very good reason why the industry has evolved this way, and the most basic way to describe it is by the concept of the core functions and added value. Remember, the three core functions are what adds value to the language services value chain. So here we have Figure 3 on page 21, if you're following along at home. It's on the screen here, and that's the language services value chain. So we need to clarify one thing up front. LSPs do not provide translation. They provide vendor management, project management, and sales. This may come as a shock to you. You may then ask why one would hire a language services company to provide translations if translations is not even their core competency. The answer is because the industry is structured in such a way that each of those middlemen, or LSPs, add necessary value. As we can see in Figure 5, each company in the chain adds value through its core functions. Along the way, each LSP also marks up the price of their services a bit so as to make a margin. The total value added at each step also reflects the value in the eyes of the customer provided by the LSP through their experience and expertise, which make the value perception even higher than the price being paid. We could talk a lot about this. Let's keep going though. The language services value chain is the interconnected branching chain of buyers and suppliers that work together to deliver all of these language services to the end client. At the bottom, freelancers add value by providing translation. As these translations move up through the value chain on their way to the buyer, each supplier adds their own value to the process so that by the time it reaches the client, the total value is much higher than the original translations. This added value is at the heart of the language services industry. It is why LSBs are happy to pay higher prices to work with massive multiple language services providers instead of working directly with translators. So that's the answer to the question. Well, what's the question? The question is, why do clients pay literally sometimes like 5 times as much to a large translation company, to a massive multiple language service provider, when they could just be paying that to the translator, right? Or they could just be paying the translator better. You know, I hear this from translators a lot. Why don't the clients engage directly with translators and pay me a little bit more and cut out the middleman? And the answer is simple, because they pay more because it's worth it. Each of those middlemen is adding value, and that value is worth it. So they happily pay more. I know I have plenty of experience working at large LSPs, and I would happily pay more if I had the budget to work with a single language vendor instead of working directly with a translator. Because if I work directly with a translator, I have to work with 20 of them. If I work with vendors, I can work with fewer of them. It makes my job as a project manager much easier. All right, so I'm going to figure out a way next time I do this to not lose track of where I am. But I think I'm right here. We see here a larger version. If you're following along in your book at home, we're on page 23, a larger version of the value chain, just kind of showing how at each step different vendors will add a certain amount of value, and they'll also mark that up so that they can make a profit. And at each stage, the price increases a little bit, and that's because at each stage the value is increasing a little bit. So if it seems complicated, don't worry. We will be discussing in more detail and providing specific examples as we move on through this book. And we're gonna, I think, stop right there because it is 5:00 and that means I can go play with my kids. So, thank you for joining me. We're going to be doing this more often, as we're going to be getting better at this too, because next time we go live here, I want to have it scheduled, and I want to have an opportunity to get feedbacks. Catherine, I see your comment right now. You're awesome, but I didn't when you originally posted it. So I'm going to figure out a way, maybe we can put those comments up on screen and get some better interaction going on. It's also going to help you guys to interact if you know when we're doing this. So I'm going to see about getting a set schedule working around my lovely co-working space here that I share with my wife. And with that, I wish you a happy November 5th. For all of my American friends, hang in there, stay off social media, stay off the news. We've got plenty of videos here on the Nimdzi YouTube channel, plenty of interesting stuff to read at www.nimdzi.com. You don't need to engage in toxic social media culture. How about that? Unless you want to. If that's your thing, no judgment. To each his own. So with that, cheers and good night.